Hi there, everyone. I'm Rob Scribner, Director of Photography. So, just give you a quick introduction about myself, how I got involved with the FS5 here. Brand new camera, obviously from Sony. So, once I graduated from film school, I was actually using, during that time there, I was using the Sony FS100, shot a really good film called Warbird Pilot Behind the Visor. Sony got pulled that film, and I've been kind of doing some off projects with them. And they asked me, Rob, would you be interested in filming with a brand new camera that no one has ever used in the United States as a professional DP? And of course the answer is yes. You would never say no to that. But gotta admit, it's so obviously my first question about it is, so what's the camera? What can it do? Well, something really interesting that I thought was really just super cool of Sony to do is that they focused on the filmmaker. So they said, it does more than 1 frame per second, we can tell you that much, and it's similar to what you're currently shooting on, which was, at the time, the FS7. So that's basically how I got involved with this project. During that time when the camera's being shipped to me, they asked me to basically pick a story, a passion project that I wanted to tell, and just tell the story first. Don't tell a story based around the camera. So that's really cool. So I picked a project called Zion, and we're actually gonna roll it here in just a second. So go ahead and roll film. And if you have any questions, go ahead and just hold off till after we watch this. Then after that, if you have a question, feel free to ask it right away.
I am Zion Warren. I own and operate a glass blowing studio in Boise, Idaho. I've been blowing glass for 20 years now. Glass blowing has never been easy, but it's come easier for me than a lot of other people that I've seen. But you do get humbled many times. The first piece I made was in a class I was taking in Seattle, and it was very rewarding, and I was hooked. First piece. Most days I'm excited to get to work. I can't quit thinking about stuff that I want to make. Even though I probably won't get to make it that day, I'll still be thinking about it. Sometimes I have to work late nights. I do weekends. I work pretty much all the time, so my wife says. And I have been called a workaholic, even though I don't think of myself as one. But sometimes you don't have a choice, so I spend a lot of time in the glass shop, yes. So despite how many people think glass blowing's very dangerous, it's not as bad as you think once you get comfortable with it, and then you don't burn yourself much, and it's not as scary as you might think, but you are dealing with 2,000 degree glass that's a few inches away from your hand, so you do have to be careful. One of the things about glass blowing I love is when you have a whole team working on one piece and everybody's flowing and working well together. You don't have to talk, and it just works out great. Sometimes one person can do one wrong move and send your whole piece to the ground. So when you mess up your nicest piece ever, you might get a little mad, but sometimes you just have to think about what you learned from it, and it makes you just want to try it again. As a glass blower, you pretty much have to be a graceful robot. That's all I am. That's what I do. There's a lot of misconception of what I actually do. Some people think I make bongs, which I don't. Most people think I just have the dream job and I make whatever I want to make, but in reality, I just make what people order, which is not always so fun. If you're sculpting and doing something you've never done, then you can get lost in the piece and not even realize that 2 hours have gone by. There's a lot of things that it takes to be a successful glass blower. The most important, I think, is just to be able to work hard and not be afraid to fail. The thing about glass is you have to have your own style. And if you can do something that nobody else is making, then you're doing good. Pretty much day to day in the glass shop, there's days where I love it and there's days where I do regret the decision, but at the end of the day, I love what I do and I wouldn't change it for a thing.
What'd you guys think? Look good? So, just to get started here, once I untangle myself, just to get started here, kind of tell you like my first thoughts of how I received the camera. Obviously, I said I've been working with Sony and everything, but so they finally sent it to me, and this big brown box arrives at my doorstep, and I open it up. First thing I do, obviously, is I want to pull out the camera, and I pull out this teeny tiny little thing, and my first thought was, this looks just like the FS7, but it's just so tiny. So I put it all together, and very first thing I want to do is kick on the menus and see what this thing can actually do. Like what's inside, what's the frame weights, what kind of codecs does it have. So right away, obviously, I knew that was going to be a 4K camera. But my first surprise is, after getting it ready, is that it actually uses SD cards, not the S/S, the XQD cards. So first off, that really confused me at first. I'm like, well, okay, that's a little odd. So once I turned it on, I noticed that they're using a different type of codec. It's similar but different. So the FS7, like I mentioned, it's actually in an XAVC-I, which is using all inch frames. Well, this one is actually using the XAVC-L. So obviously, it's a huge compression saver. And obviously, a lot of people's concerns that I've heard lately, which is how usable it is, how flexible it is. And I'll get to that in just a little bit. So that's why I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense why they're using SD cards, which as a filmmaker, and a lot of this I'm going to try to approach to you guys as more of the filmmaker side of it. We all have SD cards. Almost everybody does. We got tons of them. It's really nice to be able to sit there and repurpose them now and not have to reinvest into all these new different type of cards. So I was actually pretty happy about that. So automatically, once I saw that the different codecs on there, I always go to the top one there, which is the XAVC-L, and that's only for recording your 4K to the cards, which does up to 30 frames per second. So then I went down to the next one, which was the just XAVC, and that one will do the 1080, but it also allows you to do your high frame rates also. So I can shoot with no loss of quality on this camera at 1080, all the way up frame rates to 240 at 422 with no loss. If I stepped up to 480 frames per second, I'd get a little bit of loss, but I'll be completely honest, a lot of that stuff was shot in 480 frames. You get a little softness to it, but it's not enough to even really notice, honestly. Most of us are going to be the ones that are going to be really critical about that stuff. Now, it does go up to 960 frames per second, but it's going to be quite a bit of loss on there. But, you know, the option's there if you guys need it for whatever you guys are shooting. So, let's see. Okay, so the next thing I noticed right off the bat, kind of moving away from the menus, is the ND filter. And I saw that it said variable ND filters. So once I actually started playing around with it, I was blown away. Like, this is one of my favorite features as a filmmaker. It's being able to have not only just your typical presets of NDs, which is going to be like your 1/4 or 1/16, the 1/64th, but if I actually switch over to variable on this camera, I can dial in exactly where I wanted my ND filter without ever having to compromise my shutter, my ISO, my exposure, any of that. So I can actually change this to like 1/6 if I want, which actually on this this project here, let me skip ahead. So a shot like this. So if I had it at 1/4, it was still just a little overexposed, and especially when he actually brings the rod back out with all the glass on it. So once I switched over to the variable, I set a preset on there for 1/6, and it was awesome. And I just flick it. I didn't have to go into any menus. I didn't have to change anything. I just shoot on the fly. So one of the other selling points about this camera for me is, again, how small it was. Since I shoot on the FS7, it can be a very heavy camera once you actually get like your extension unit, the V-mount, the Odyssey 7Q, big lenses, matte box, follow focus. It's a beast, it really is. Being able to take this camera right out of the box and shoot that very cinema quality looking stuff is huge. So I can move around a lot faster because I'm primarily a documentary filmmaker, so I couldn't tell Zion, hey, stop, redo that, do that again. There is no retakes. You have one shot to get it right. So I have to be on top of my game. I need to know where my buttons are. I need to know how the codecs are working. I know how everything works about it. I picked this thing up, and I had it for, I think, 3 days before I actually shot this. So what was really nice, coming from an FS100 to a 700 FS7, now to an FS5, it's super easily interchangeable, which is huge. So, real quick, I'm going to switch over to what it was like when I was shooting with it on set. What were things that I liked about it, functionality of it, because realistically, that's one of the most important parts about what we do as filmmakers. So again, going back to the ND filters, as I kind of touched on, as how valuable they were. Just dial everything perfectly. And I mean, it's not that complicated. Just flicking 2 switches, and then you're good to go. The balance of this camera, so there's a couple shots in here where you actually see where I went completely handheld. Let's see here. And towards the end. Well, actually, so before I went handheld, actually. So the way that this camera is designed, the CG on it is just so perfect. With even this lens, other lenses on it, I could have this sucker on my slider, and I can move it left and right, so I'm basically doing dolly moves. I'm panning, tilting, and focusing all at the same time, and it looks like you could have a crew of 3 people. I can't do that on my FS7 because of the sheer size of it. So form factor, to me, is what really makes this thing one of the most useful things in my arsenal as a filmmaker, is the fact that I can grab it and go and just run and gun. And for most of us, that's the way it is. Obviously, switching from frame rates, that how easy is it to do that? Like, it's very, like I said, run and gun. Is it easy? Do you have to go through a lot of menus? If you're shooting in 4K, you do got to go through a menu because you got to switch your codec real fast. But once you've done that, you simply just hit the button on the side, and if you want to change it, you hold it down, and you can scroll through it, and done. You're shooting in just a few minutes. I actually skipped through one of the pictures. I don't know if I can go back or not. Let's go backwards. There we go. So this picture right here is basically shows you what it's going to look like when you're actually recording on high frame rate. So it's in burst mode. It's just like the FS700, but what I found really, really helpful as a filmmaker is that they designed it with an end trigger. So that way, I never felt like I had to hit record and then try to get the action. I could simply follow the action, and once I got it, I would hit record, and it's basically going to write itself to the card. So, and I can actually watch the shot back as it's loading it there, so that's exactly what that looks like. It's very helpful. That way I also knew I had good feedback of what my shots look like. The only downside to it is that you obviously have to sit there and let it wait. but normally by then you're switching shots anyways. So going back to the codec and the type of color grading, and so what I did is I shot this whole thing in Picture Profile 9, which I found was the flattest, the most dynamic range of the camera. So you basically got about 14 stops of dynamic range with it. So one thing that was really interesting is that when I got the camera, I never had a manual, so I had nothing to read through. I had to figure this all out on my own. And so just digging through, which was really fast, really easy to do, I was able to decide, yep, I know in post I can really stretch the limits of this particular camera. So obviously, like shots like this is shot from an FS5, obviously, right here. And you can tell if I were to switch over to some of these other shots, they look identical to each other. Like I can really make an FS7 and FS5 actually match really, really dang well. And it's mainly because of the way they designed it, with the Cine EI mode on the FS7, and then you shoot in the Picture Profile 9 or anything else that you customize with their S-Log, I can really push them to make them match each other. Plus, it just comes down to understanding your histograms and everything like that. So if you frame your shots right, you expose your shots right, you really shouldn't have to push your footage too far to get them to match. So kind of moving into that, I did edit all this in Premiere. One thing I liked about it so much, I was a little worried about it, is that would I have to transcode any of this stuff? And the answer is no. I would just take it off the card, download it, and I could drop it right into the timeline, and it plays perfectly. And a lot of it, too, is probably because of the compression on it, too, using XAVCL. So, and then, of course, when you start the color grading, I found that I could push the footage so far without blowing out the highlights, or I can bring them down just a little bit. Nothing was really clipping. And I really like shooting for emotion. I shot a lot of this in the dark because I really wanted to emphasize how hot this molten glass was and how hot the furnace was. And then especially when the light and it hits your talent and it's just all that sweat coming off, it really, really, really shows it. And it shows the emotion of what he's going through and how much he loves it and the passion. So obviously, I wanted to shoot a lot of low light stuff. That's the only way you're going to really get that. And I only used 2 lights in this whole thing. They were basically 2 Dracast lights, and I just had a guy off on the side just running with them on the side. And I'd just go there, and we'd go shoot. Pretty run and gun, like I said. But obviously in low light, it got very little noise to it, surprisingly, especially once I found out after I shipped the camera back that the native ISO for this thing was actually set up to 3200. So I was like, whoa, it's like, that's crazy. But even though I didn't know that, all of our shots just turned out just beautiful. Let's see if there's anything else that I've missed here with my final thoughts before I start asking questions here. Okay, so I got a lot of questions over at the booth. Is where do you see this camera fitting in? How do you use it? Why do you have it in your arsenal? Well, honestly, most of the time the clients I get are very fast turnaround. We don't have a lot of prep time. You just got to really run and gun. You got to use your instincts, and you need to know your camera well. This camera literally does everything for me. It shoots the 4K that I need. It shoots the high frame rates that I need. Most of my clients still want everything at 1080 when they output it, so I can take all my stuff and I can scale it down, and if I ever have to make a jump cut or something, I can use my 4K footage to do that, so it gives me lots of flexibility in post, which is really nice. And my editors aren't really too mad at me because, heaven forbid that I was a half a stop off or something on a shot, they still have a lot of wiggle room even with the XAVCL. So I see a lot of people like people shooting weddings, documentaries, independent filmmakers, young filmmakers really trying to take it up from DSLR and moving into a professional world. This is exactly the type of camera that's perfect for it. And I know when I first started, I wish I had this camera, and because it's perfect. It's going to last a long time. So, on that note, do you guys have any questions?
On the Zion, how did you handle your exposure?
So I actually use my histogram the whole time, and you can bring it up on the screen, and I live with a histogram. And of course, and actually just like the previous speaker that was here, is you really, like, I knew I wanted this dark. I knew it wanted very contrasty also. So there's a lot of times I had to sit there and go, okay, it's really, really on the far left side of it. But at the same time, the fact that I can get that feedback and know exactly where I wanted it to, especially in these areas here, without trying to blow them out too much and get all that lossless data there, and with white pixels and whatnot. So that's how I did most of it. Now, I ran most of it on the stock lens. I shot almost all of this on the stock lens here, and I actually ran it at about an f4, and then somewhere between an f4. If I ever did change it, I'd go to a f5.6. So. Oh, there's one over there. Focusing the camera?
Yeah, focusing the camera.
Yeah, so obviously that's a big thing, with Sony's electronic focus rings. So because I've been shooting so much with Sony stuff over the last couple years, obviously muscle memory is kind of a interesting thing, So you're not suddenly using muscle memory. You have to really pay attention to the shot and know when to stop it. Since I had a lot of practice with that, I was able to just nail it right the first time. But anyone that's actually going to be investing in these type of lenses, it's just practice. It's really what it comes down to. Now, this LCD screen is very, very sharp, actually. So it's a lot sharper than some of the other ones I've used, like on the FS100 and the FS700. So I could sit there and look inside it and just know exactly where I want it. It also has peaking in it, too. So if I was wide with a shot, I would turn the peaking off because everything looks like it's in focus. Everything's got red dots everywhere. But once I was zooming in on my shots like these, I would just turn that on, and then as soon as I saw those little red dots come right into focus, leave it alone. So, and then the other thing too is it does actually have a built-in viewfinder, electronic viewfinder, which is really, really nice. Obviously, I didn't have to worry about glare, and glare is a big problem. FS100, FS700, FS7, they all have a tube on it. This one doesn't. So if I did need it, I could easily just switch over to this screen right here, flick of a switch, and I'm going to have power to this back here, and I can do my critical focusing. So, yeah. Any more questions? On this particular project, or just in general? In general. So, in general, I use this lens quite a bit, like I mentioned, but I actually really like shooting with Zeiss glass, like the new Luxie ones that are out. I really like those ones a lot because I'm a big fan of manual lenses personally. So if I can find a nice prime that's, that I can adjust like Rokinons. I actually shoot with a lot of Rokinons on these cameras, so I'll just put my Metabones adapter on it. This camera with adapters, you can use your EF lenses. What Sony's not asking you to change your lenses to fit their stuff. They want to evolve with your gear too. So I thought that was really handy. There's a new device out there from Aperture that actually is not trying to ever communicate with the body, versus like Metabones and those other ones. They're trying to actually send power to the body to get feedback. This other company is that they're actually at one of the booths over there. It's really handy for this particular camera. It's all done. It's powered. It's basically a powered adapter, so that way you can actually change the exposure and you can change the focus on it just with this basically this little stick. So I'm probably going to be using that a lot more, so that way I don't have to worry about a firmware upgrade or anything like that from a Metabones adapter. So, yeah.
Will you create a profile for different setting?
Yes, you can. So you can customize your picture profiles in here. When you really start, you get into S-Log and you start shooting in kind of like their cine modes, the only problem that you're going to have is that you have to pick your white balance in your profile. So it's very similar to like an FS7. But once you moved out of those little profiles, if you put it more in the standard setting, then you can actually dial in white balance. But you can sit there and you can customize it and basically create your own permanent. It's going to bake it into the camera, of course, but it's basically like making your own little lit. So if you knew what you wanted to output and you wanted fast turnaround, take the time and create one yourself. One thing that did help me real quick, I know we got to go here, so is since I did shoot this in such a flat profile, exposure is a little bit of an issue, because what you're reading the histogram and you're still trying to think about post. They did build in a gamma assist button, and what I did is I assigned it to one of these buttons over here on the side. And so I would just click that on and off, and I'd basically throw what is basically equivalent to like a 709. So that way I at least got a rough idea of what it would look like if I threw a little bit of grade and see what colors would pop out more. And it actually was very similar to this, but in post I just crushed it down just a little bit more for that emotion. So, yeah.
4K? Can you shoot slow motion?
No, so
in
you only can
4K?
shoot slow motion in full HD. So in 4K, the highest frame rate you can go to is 30 frames per second. When you go to HD, 1080, you can shoot from 24 frames basically all the way up to 960. But there's two different types of that. So you can shoot 1080 with audio, recording to the cards at all the way up to 60 frames per second. Once you go into slow and quick mode, you can actually you lose your audio, and then it goes into more of a burst mode, which is like one of those previous slides that I've shown you over here. So, yeah, right there. That guy. So it's kind of like a burst, and that basically starts anywhere from 60 all the way up to 960 frames. No. Any more questions? All right, well, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this. And if you have any more questions, I'm actually going to be right over here at the Sony booth also. So if you guys want to touch and feel the camera and play with it, we're there to help. So thank you.